The origins of the Albanian people are not definitely known, but data drawn from history and from archaeological and anthropological studies have led some researchers to consider the Albanians to be the direct descendants of the ancient Illyrians. The linguistic evidence in that regard is most unclear. The Albanian language is certainly a distinct branch of the Indo-European family, but, largely because of a dearth of information on the language of the ancient Illyrians, it is difficult to convincingly demonstrate a connection between the two languages. Some scholars, moreover, dispute such theses, arguing that Illyrians were not autochthonous to Albania and that Albanian derives from a dialect of the now extinct Thracian language. But again, the data are sparse and thus the arguments are difficult to judge. Illyrian culture is believed to have evolved from the Stone Age and to have manifested itself in the territory of Albania toward the beginning of the Bronze Age, about 2000 BCE. The Illyrians were not a uniform body of people but a conglomeration of many tribes that inhabited the western part of the Balkans, from what is now Slovenia in the northwest to, and including, the region of Epirus, which extends about halfway down the mainland of modern Greece. In general, Illyrians in the highlands of Albania were more isolated than those in the lowlands, and their culture evolved more slowly, a distinction that persisted throughout Albania's history. Authors of antiquity relate that the Illyrians were a sociable and hospitable people, renowned for their daring and bravery at war. Illyrian women were fairly equal in status to the men, even to the point of becoming heads of tribal federations. In matters of religion, Illyrians were pagans who believed in an afterlife and buried their dead along with arms and various articles intended for personal use. The land of Illyria was rich in minerals, iron, copper, gold, silver, and Illyrians became skillful in the mining and processing of metals. They were highly skilled boat builders and sailors as well. Indeed, their light swift galleys known as Liburni were of such superior design that the Romans incorporated them into their own fleet as a type of warship called the Liburnian. After warring for the better part of the 4th century BCE against the expansionist Macedonian state of Philip II and Alexander the Great, the Illyrians faced a greater threat from the growing power of the Romans. Seeing Illyrian territory as a bridgehead for conquests east of the Adriatic, Rome in 229 BCE attacked and defeated the Illyrians. Led by Queen Tuda, and by 168 BCE had established effective control over Illyria, Albania, country in southern Europe, located in the western part of the Balkan Peninsula on the Strait of Otranto, the southern entrance to the Adriatic Sea. The capital city is Tirana. Albanians refer to themselves as Shqiptar, often taken to mean sons of eagles, though it may well refer to those associated with the Shqip, i.e., Albanian, language, and to their country as Shqiperia. They generally consider themselves to be descendants of the ancient Illyrians, who lived in Central Europe and migrated southward to the territory of Albania at the beginning of the Bronze Age, about 2000 BCE. They have lived in relative isolation and obscurity through most of their difficult history, in part because of the rugged terrain of their mountainous land but also because of a complex of historical, cultural, and social factors. Because of its location on the Adriatic and Ionian Seas, Albania has long served as a bridgehead for various nations and empires seeking conquest abroad. In the 2nd century BCE, the Illyrians were conquered by the Romans, and from the end of the 4th century CE they were ruled by the Byzantine Empire. After suffering centuries of invasion by Visigoths, Huns, Bulgars, and Slavs, the Albanians were finally conquered by the Ottoman Turks in the 15th century. Ottoman rule cut off Albania from Western civilization for more than 4 centuries, but in the late 19th century the country began to remove itself from Ottoman influence and to rediscover old affinities and common interests with the West. Land of Albania. Albania is bounded by Montenegro to the northwest, Kosovo to the northeast, North Macedonia to the east, Greece to the southeast and south, and the Adriatic and Ionian Seas to the west and southwest, respectively. Albania's immediate western neighbor, Italy, lies some 50 miles, 80 kilometers, across the Adriatic Sea. Albania has a length of about 210 miles, 340 kilometers, and a width of about 95 miles, 150 kilometers. Relief. Albania has a mountainous geography. About 3/4 of its territory consists of mountains and hills with elevations of more than 650 feet, 200 meters, above sea level. The remainder consists of coastal and alluvial lowlands. The North Albanian Alps, an extension of the Dinaric Alps. cover the northern part of the country. With elevations approaching 8,900 feet, 2,700 meters, this is the most rugged part of the country. It is heavily forested and sparsely populated, in contrast to the Alps, the central mountain region, which extends north-south from the Drin River to the central Devil and lower Osum rivers. South of the central mountain region is a series of northwest-southeast trending mountain ranges with elevations up to 8,200 feet, 2,500 meters. Composed of limestone rock, the ranges are separated by wide valleys. Unlike the Alps in the central region, which are covered with dense forest, the mountains of the southern region are either bare or have a thin covering of Mediterranean shrubs, oaks, and pines. They serve essentially as pasture for livestock. Albania has one of the most homogeneous populations in Europe, with non-Albanians accounting for less than 1/10 of the total population. The largest minorities are Vlachs, Greeks, concentrated mainly in the southeast, and Macedonians. Living along the eastern border, the two main subgroups of Albanians are the Gegs, in the north and the Tosks in the south. Differences between the two groups were quite pronounced before World War II. Until the communist takeover in 1944, Albanian politics were dominated by the more numerous Gegs. Renowned for their independent spirit and fighting abilities, they traditionally opposed outside authority, whether that of foreign invaders or that of the Albanian central government. Traditional GEG society was based on tribal groups, each one led by a clan chieftain or bajraktar. Under the communist regime, this clan system largely disappeared from Albania, but the patriarchal families characteristic of the Gegs are still evident among ethnic Albanians in Serbia, Montenegro, Kosovo, and North Macedonia. Because their southern territories were easily accessible to the outside world, the Tosks were more subject to foreign influence than the Gegs. Before World War II, theirs was a mostly semi-feudal society. The peasantry, which made up most of the population, lived at the subsistence level, while a small group of large landowners controlled about 2/3 of the land. The communist movement drew most of its initial support from Tosks in the south. The Albanian language, called Shqip or Shqip by Albanians, is of interest to linguists because, as a descendant of the extinct Illyrian tongue, it is the only surviving member of its branch of the Indo-European language family. Influenced by centuries of rule by foreigners, the Albanian vocabulary has adopted many words from the Latin, Greek, Turkish, Italian, and Slavic tongues. There are two principal dialects, Geg, spoken north of the Shkumban River, and Tosk, spoken in the south. Geg dialects are also spoken in Serbia, Montenegro, Kosovo, and North Macedonia, and Tosk dialects, though somewhat archaic as a result of centuries of separation from their place of origin in Albania, are prominent in the Albanian communities of Greece and Italy. Although there are variations even within these two dialects, Albanians can understand one another with no difficulty, because official business and ecclesiastical functions had long been conducted in Latin or Greek. Albanian did not acquire a definitive orthography until 1908, when a writing system was adopted based on the Roman alphabet. Before this time, publications written in Albania used a mix of different alphabets, namely, Latin, Greek, Turco-Arabic, and Cyrillic. Attempts were then made in following decades to create a unified language based on the Geg dialect of the central Elbasan region. However, all printed materials were published in Tosk until 1972, when a Congress of Orthography was convened in Tirana, and a unified Albanian language based on Tosk was established. Religion, as a legacy of nearly 5 centuries of Ottoman rule, Albania is a predominantly Muslim country. However, as a result of the rigid enforcement of atheism during the communist regime, today most Albanians are adherents of religious groups in name only and practice largely secular lifestyles. In 1967, the Communist Party officially proclaimed Albania an atheistic country and commenced to close all places of worship, churches, mosques, and zawiyas, confiscate their property, and ban religious observances. For the whole of its 45 years of absolute rule, the party engaged in large-scale persecution of believers. Only in 1990, when freedom of worship was restored, did churches and mosques begin reopening. In the early 21st century, about 7/10 of the Albanian population was nominally Muslim, more than half of them Sunni Muslims, and the next largest group being the Bektashi sect. Those who identified with Eastern Orthodoxy constituted about 1/5 of the population, and those associated with Roman Catholicism constituted about 1/10. Muslims are spread throughout the country, although they particularly dominate the center. Roman Catholics have settled primarily in the northern part of the country, mainly in the city of Shkodër, while Orthodox Christians are prominent in the southern districts of Gjirokastër, Kors, Berat, and Vlorë. Mother Teresa, a Skopje-born ethnic Albanian who served as a Roman Catholic missionary to India in the 20th century, is a folk hero in Albania. Economy of Albania. Before 1991, the ruling Communist Party directed the country's entire economy through a series of 5-year plans. All means of production were under state control, agriculture was fully collectivized, industry was nationalized, and private enterprise was strictly forbidden. In addition, a provision of the constitution prohibited the government from seeking foreign aid, accepting loans, or allowing foreign investment, which contributed to Albania's reputation as isolationist. In the post-communist period, economic decision-making was decentralized, and restrictions on private trade were lifted. Foreign investment was pronounced by the mid-1990s, with assistance coming from the United States, the European Union, and the International Monetary Fund. By the middle of that decade, Albania boasted the fastest-growing economy on the continent, but, as one of Europe's poorest countries, it was still considered less developed. Albania's economic transition stumbled in 1997 when individual investors, constituting perhaps 1/3 of the country's population, fell prey to a pyramid finance scheme that devastated the national economy and led to weeks of anarchy. A UN-sponsored multinational force was called to restore order. This chaos, compounded by the Kosovo conflict at the end of the decade, led to fractious political polarization that slowed the development of the Albanian economy for several years. Still, economic reform continued, and, at the beginning of the 21st century, Albania was recording modest annual growth in GDP. Remittances from Albanians working abroad account for a significant amount of revenue. Although more than 4/5 of the economy has been privatized since the 1990s, the transformation process has been slow and uneven. Agriculture, forestry, and fishing, the former communist government allocated substantial resources to the development of agriculture. Large-scale programs of land reclamation, soil improvement, and irrigation, as well as increased use of fertilizers, all contributed to a significant expansion of agricultural production. Despite these advances, agricultural production continued to be hindered by the persistence of traditional farming methods and low mechanization, which required a relatively high number of farm workers. Measures intended to encourage the growth of food processing and agriculture were hampered by chronic shortages of basic foods, a failing infrastructure, a lack of raw materials, a shortage of skilled workers and managers, low productivity, and poor labor discipline. However, agriculture has registered annual growth during the post-communist period. About half of the economically active population is employed in agriculture, which contributes about 1/5 of Albania's GDP. Only 1/4 of the total land area is arable, yet the country meets nearly all its food needs from domestic production. The main crops are wheat, corn, maize, sugar beets, and watermelons. Apples, plums, grapes, walnuts, and chestnuts are also grown. Citrus fruits are cultivated on the southern coast, as are figs and olives wherever there is sufficient irrigation. Major livestock are sheep, goats, cattle, and pigs. Manufacturing, the former communist government's policy of rapid industrialization, aimed at making the country as self-sufficient as possible, led to the creation of a relatively modern multi-branched industry. Former strengths, however, such as the engineering and chemical industries, have fallen into decline. Manufacturing, together with mining, now generates only about 1/10 of national income and employs only a small percentage of the labor force. Leading manufacturers are food and beverages, building materials, petroleum, textiles, and cement. Construction accounts for about 1/8 of Albania's GDP. The economy has become increasingly service-oriented, yet it is often unable to meet the population's demands for various consumer goods. Trade, Albania had a growing trade deficit in the early years of the 21st century. Its major trading partners include Italy, Greece, Turkey, Germany, and China. It exports textiles, footwear, and base metals. The principal imports are food products, machinery and equipment, spare parts, textiles, and minerals and metals. Cultural life. Cultural development in Albania was handicapped by more than 4 decades of communist rule. The government imposed strict censorship on the press, publications, and the performing arts. The succeeding governments have made a conscious effort to encourage and preserve the country's rich folk life. Albania is known for its traditions of hospitality, which are based on the canon, code, a set of unwritten laws devised in the 15th century by Prince Leke de Kagjan, an Albanian feudal lord. The canon governs all social relations, including those involving marriage, death, family, and religion. Some Albanians still follow its customary laws, including the right to avenge a killing. Jackmarge, blood feuds, were known to occur in parts of northern Albania into the 21st century. Daily life and social customs, in addition to traditional religious holidays, pagan holidays and folklore play a role in Albanian life. Agricultural fairs and religious festivals occur throughout the year and often include competitions that highlight highly skilled sports, which are occasionally contested in the National Stadium in Tirana. Dita e Veres, Spring Day, is celebrated in mid-March in Elbasan. Folkloric festivals take place in towns across the country. One of the largest is the National Festival of Folklore held in Gjirokastër, a historic town that was designated a UNESCO World Heritage Site in 2005. Albania's independence is celebrated throughout the country on November 28. Much of Albania's cuisine consists of meat and seafood. Among the most popular dishes are roasts, biftek, beef loin, kebabs, and koft, meatballs. Frigis Tirana, a hot dish of meat, peppers, eggs, and tomatoes, is a specialty of Tirana. In southern Albania, kukurek, sheep intestines broiled on a spit, is a common entree. Carp and the revered but rare karan, trout, are the preferred food fish throughout the country. Oshaf, a pudding made from figs and sheep's milk, is a common dessert. The traditional Albanian drink is raki, a local brandy distilled from grapes that is often imbibed before a meal.